Hello, everyone, and this is Munson Steed with Sisters with Superpowers, and I am so excited to introduce you to one of God's favorite executives who truly has superpowers, and that is none other than Melody Parker. How are you? Welcome to Sister with Superpowers.
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited about the conversation we're about to have.
When you think about the journey that you've had, can you share with us how did you end up being at Google and one of the selected executives to lead this whole idea of DE and Y or I and all these initials for executives like yourself? It's a huge opportunity.
It's a tremendous opportunity. And actually, I consider myself more of like chief steward than chief diversity officer, but I'm a very unlikely person to hold a role when you think about like traditional backgrounds, things like that. So, and I say that because I grew up in a small town in North Carolina. I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood, proud graduate of Hampton University, grew up
It's
in the
you.
back. Yes. So grew up in the backyard of A&T University. But when I went into college, my brother and we're first generation college, but that also means we're first generation corporate. So not having like those likely mentors in that place. My mother's like still at 83, the wisest person I know. And I still consult back with her. But through that, I learned a tremendous amount. And I grew up in the aerospace and defense industry, just came into tech 4 years ago when I joined Google. But one of the things I recognized was like how to add my gifts and talents in the moments that matter. And, that really helped, propel me to the diversity organization and then to really lead this organization. And I use all of the skills that I've learned across my career in human resources, but also I'm able to bring the full identity of who I am and to use the humanity of that to give voice to people, who don't get to sit in the places that I do. And that's why I said stewardship.
I love that. So, just for those who don't know, what does your responsibilities include, and what's a day like for you at the job?
Okay, so let me tell you about responsibilities. My days are crazy, but from a responsibility standpoint, so I lead diversity, equity, and inclusion across Google. So I'm responsible for ensuring that we not only have the most inclusive workplace where people can come and bring the best of who they are and contribute fully across all groups, but making sure that we're hiring. Uh, like a diverse workforce so that we're bringing people that reflect our users, the people who like use our products, the folks that are on our YouTube platform, that we make sure that our workforce really mirrors society. And so that's the other part of my responsibility. And it's not just about how we hire, it's also about how do we progress. Like, so I'm looking at what's the social contract that happens when you join Google, and like what's that implied promise of career and development. So my responsibilities are looking across how talent is developed, how we're onboarded, and then very importantly, how are we retaining people. And if people from one group are leaving at a faster rate than the other group, why is that? So that's the key responsibility. And then making sure that our products are also inclusive and that we're building diversity and equity into our product design.
What is it when we say reimagining pathways to tech? Like if we had to ask that, or if a mom asked you that, or if a dad, or even a HBCU college professor said, how can we reimagine pathways to tech? Given your insight now, and given that you're new but not new, what would you say?
I would say that the initial path to tech didn't include all communities. And so, now there's a huge focus on making sure that, tech has a workforce that's truly diverse and really mirrors the communities that I talked about a little bit earlier. But there are communities that historically were not in tech. So when I talk about reimagining pathways, making sure that we're looking across like all pipelines, that we're cultivating and developing pipelines to make sure that all communities are represented in tech, because that's not how tech has started.
Ah, you know, I love the idea of that, but that's a huge responsibility. And if you were going to give a speech at Hampton today, what would you say to those graduates who had just graduated? How should they approach the world and tech?
Well, and my own kids as well. So I have two Hampton graduates out of my two of my three children. And how I would answer that is go where you're embraced. Look for how you add, like, what are the skills that are additive? Know the industry that you're going into and really understand the value that you bring. And I think sometimes when we're in underrepresented groups, and I think about, as a Black woman, we just quite naturally, like, we're looking for areas where we fit and how do we fit in. But I think that's a misnomer. We need to look at where do we add, and we need to know we are the special sauce. Like, we're trading on ourselves and on our talents. And I think if more graduates understood the value that they bring and that they are the asset, I think that would help. It would help with how we interview, how we showcase our talent, and how we really talk about those accomplishments. And then always over deliver. So, if you're going to knock something out of the park, like, knock it out of the park in a way that no one would even dream about. And that becomes the brand.
I love that. Knock it out of the park. Definitely beat all expectations.
Yes.
You're beating some expectations. You're a sister with superpower on an executive level. If you were going to coach,
Yes.
how would you coach some of the young sisters that are in tech to actually continue to break the glass ceiling that you penetrated? What are some of the things that you're saying to them as they're listening to your counsel about their careers, about their composition, and about who they are to this world?
I do coach, and I take it very seriously, and I coach inside of Google, and I also coach externally as well. And what I always say is that the first and foremost is you are not alone. We always come with others, because when you're in isolating situations, you look to the left, you look to the right, and you don't see anybody like you start counting. Like, am I the only Black person, Black woman, woman of color in this room? And then immediately you're like, oh my God, like, I'm alone. But it's not true. We always come with others, because there are others who have paved the way in front of us. And so that's what I coach. Like, you come with community. The community might not be sitting there with you, but they are there with you in spirit. And so that's one. Two, lift as you climb. Like, we can all lift others. And even like the lowest level person in the organization, there are people that you can lift as you climb. And that's how we pay it forward, and we're building that community. And then ensure that you have more than one mentor, because sometimes we think we have to find a mentor and it's one person. And then I encourage people, look for mentors that do not look like you. Look for people that you would not normally have access to. And as a personal example, when I was first assigned prior to Google, when I was early in my career, and someone decided, hey, Melonie, like, is it going to go in this high potential program, and we're going to give you a mentor. They gave me a Black woman. And I politely said, I have access to Black women every day. And I don't lack from access, but I actually don't have a lot of access to white men. And I would really like to understand that perspective. Do you think that you could go back and find me a white male mentor? So, number one, I shopped. Number two, they actually did it. And I was able to develop like a relationship that I still, keep strong today. And not only did I learn a lot because it was a perspective I just wasn't familiar with, but he would say that he learned a lot because he learned something culturally. And I think I helped break stereotypes for him.
I love that. So asking for something different, not the stereotypical.
Ask for something different because you need a perspective that's different from your own. And you want to understand that perspective. And you get to fill in the blank as to what that is and have more than one.
Right. There is shrinking in your biggest moment. Oftentimes, you're in a tech environment, you're in an environment that is corporate, not just tech, and we shrink culturally because we're not certain. How can you share how not to shrink and to speak your mind when it's probably your biggest moment and they're really looking for you to be honest?
We have to have courage. Like, and courage means like you're scared, you're just showing up anyway. And so, recognize that fear can be inevitable, but it doesn't mean that you can't face it. I will tell you for me, where I really needed courage was at the beginning of the racial justice movement that we're in. And so, you started to realize, hey, this isn't like a series of episodic events. We're actually in a movement. And what that meant for me personally, across all parts of my career, I actually code switched. I checked like that most vulnerable part of myself at the door, but I realized I can't separate like my identity as a Black woman from the chief diversity officer of Google, who happens to be a Black woman. And that has to be one and the same. And it was scary because it meant that I actually had to like bring those vulnerable parts out. But what I realized was I had to give humanity to people who only saw what was playing out in the media, and that people might not know Breonna Taylor and they might ascribe, different types of perspectives about that situation, but they do know Melonie. And if I can stand up and say, this is what happened to me, and this is where I hurt, I can stand in the gap and I can provide a lens and I can provide a face. And it's scary because of potential backlash from different sources, but I knew that that was important. And I think that's what we have to think about. Like, what does it mean to lay yourself on the line? And why are you doing it? So even with backlash, I'm still okay because I was able to accomplish what needed to happen.
So, Sister with Superpower, Melanie Parker, you're living in your truth and you're literally making sure that our voices, our cultural voices, are there.
Yes.
When you talk about talent acquisition and retention in a place where microaggression is kind of popular and you get a quick email from somebody that's 2 words or they don't turn on their camera and we're all supposed to be meeting, but we're not meeting. We're actually just sound bites toward each other. What do you coach those individuals that are just getting to corporate America on microaggression and how to really manage through? And then obviously letting the corporation know that it's not okay.
Yeah, so first and foremost, letting the corporation know it's not okay. And really increasing, like we're very focused on elevating the capability of managers and leaders to lead across lines of difference, particularly racial equity lines of difference. And one of the things that I do educate on is that if you take Black community, in a lot of cases, we're either invisible or hyper visible, and neither is the state to be. Really, it has to be normalized so that Black talent is normalized, with all other talent, but that requires something different. It requires, in some cases, that feedback is given differently. Encouragement has an equity lens. People should know when you give them feedback. And when managers don't have capability, they end up leading from the back, not because they don't want to, but because they feel awkward. They don't want to make a mistake. And so they say nothing. But then that blank canvas of the person that's receiving it, they're filling that in with something very different. So we're very focused on capability, on educating. One of the great things about the racial justice movement is allies have leaned in and said, what can I do? How can I support? I want to be active. So we've really leaned into that, deepened the work there, and we provide a whole curriculum around allyship, but it's about how we build capability. And then notice I didn't say training. I didn't say anything about training and awareness, but it's about building capability.
When you are there and you show up, and obviously, you know what it is to come from an HBCU in that transition. What are three keys that you would say for someone to be prepared for when this is your first moment? How to show up?
One, show up knowing what you add, show up curious, and show up with empathy. Show up with the ability to put yourself like in the other person's shoes, understand, a perspective that's different from your own. Be very curious about what that is. And if you could do those two things and then you like actively listen, you're going to get some keys in the moment live just by showing empathy, being curious, and actively listening. And then listen, like operate from the inside out. What'd you learn by employing those three things? That will inform a lot about how to navigate, and it'll reflect value to that other person. And when you reflect value to someone else, they typically respond with reflecting value back to you.
Those reflections are real important. But when you talk about curiosity, how do you define curiosity in the workplace? And how can a young person or an older person who may not know to lean into curiosity
Yes.
in a moment when you're with strangers? So, how do I do that and not feel like I don't know? Or how do I, culturally, I want to be smart, but I really need to know where you're coming from with that? How do they do that?
Power of it's power of the question. It's really the power of asking questions about the other person's experience, not like you're rattling questions off on a list, but when we started our conversation, we were able to find a natural rhythm because we were both asking questions of, the other person. And the goal of that is to get to common ground. Like if that person who's just come into that environment and they are, recognizing what's happening around them, likely questions are, how have you done this before? What are the things that you've tried that haven't worked, that you're still trying to solve for? What would success look like for you? Like those three questions would allow you to do that. And then one of the things that was a huge barrier for me working in the corporate space was I'm very accomplishment driven, but I was raised to be very accomplishment driven. In fact, I was raised to be better, smarter, faster because that was what was required to get ahead. But what I wasn't raised was the power of networking in a corporate setting. And so one of the like early experiences all around me, people would be going to happy hour. They would have at Christmas like cookie exchanges. And I wouldn't go because I thought, you know what, that's not important. I gotta like, go make sure that I'm following through. And it was a white woman who pulled my coat and she said, you're missing out. All these opportunities to network, have access outside, of normal work. You're missing the power of relationships and you better go bake some cookies or buy some. And I expect to see you at the Christmas exchange. And you know what? She was right. And we don't tell, our young people relationships matter. You don't have to build a million or 50, but you should build five. And so I think that's the other thing that we have to do is like, let's not over instill accomplishments and undervalue relationships. And so that's the other thing that I coach on as well is the power of networks.
We're coming to the end of the year. You've got a lot of people working, trying to figure out how to set career goals, how to reestablish them. Can we close out with you kind of giving Coach, if you will, Coach Parker, just a few of those goals on how to kind of come to the end of the year, analyze where you are, and then set maybe a couple for your first at least 6 months if you haven't thought through the whole year?
Absolutely. And one, I'll say, I think this great resignation, I consider it the great reflection. I think this is really about people doing just that, like stand, take stock of where you are. We've been very quiet within ourselves because of the pandemic. Now people are starting to come out. So as you come to the end of the year, reflect back, go to a quiet space, whatever comfort zone is for you. And then think about like what happened over the year that I felt really good about. And then when you get that list, what of that were you the most proud of? Like where'd you get the most joy? And really do like deep thinking about what happened for you when you were doing that. Then conversely, what didn't go as well as you thought? Why didn't it go as well as you thought? And then that would give you two lists, and then prioritize that. And you need to work on like what you do well as where you need to develop. Because if you only work on what you need to develop, you're going to lose a little bit of joy because often those aren't the spaces that bring us all this excitement. So you can take strengths and maximize them, and you can take development areas. Don't take more than three, or you're going to exhaust yourself and you're going to be the people that sign up for a gym membership and then by February they fell off. So don't be that person. And then at the beginning of the year, set it realistic goals just for the quarter. Like, what do you want to happen between January 1 and the end of March? And then when you get to that third week in March, see where you are. What you didn't do, carry it over. Don't beat yourself up, just carry it over. That's my advice.
Well, we appreciate you. We love you, and we are so proud of you, Melody Parker, the Chief Diversity Officer for Google, Global Chief Diversity Officer. That's like huge. Like that's worldwide. Like a Hampton graduate worldwide. We are so proud. You're clearly a sister with superpowers, but really appreciate your honesty and the gifts that you've given us here today on Rolling Out.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure.